Hi, I'm the Reverend Ann Dieterle, the rector at Calvary Episcopal Church in Columbia, Missouri, and you're watching the first video in the series about our 2022 Lenten OneRead. We are going through Brene Brown's newest book, Atlas of the Heart, which isn't an explicitly religious book, but I chose it because I've been a fan of Brene Brown's work for years, and her work around courage, vulnerability, and connection have made me both a better person and a better priest. Her thesis in this book is that identifying and naming our emotions in all of their complexity is crucial for regulating our emotions, connecting with one another, and being whole. And that resonates with me as I look around at our world today, and also as I go through scripture. In John 17, Jesus prays that his disciples may all be one. And even if Jesus didn't have these things explicitly in mind, I believe they get at what he's talking about. Because I don't think that Jesus expected that we'd all be in agreement about everything all of the time, but that his hope for his disciples is that they could show up and be compassionate and courageous, no matter what was happening in the world about them. Another reason I chose the book is that naming and categorizing emotions the way she does, I believe, can help us to have more empathy for one another. I may not understand why you're angry if you happen to be angry, but I can understand that it's a place that you go when you feel wronged, as she categorizes in her book. Because I know what it's like to be angry. I know what it's like to feel wronged. Being able to recognize that as a common experience is necessary for empathy, even if I don't get the exact rationale for what you're feeling. The reading for this week covered the introduction and chapters 1 and 2. Right away in the introduction, she grabbed my attention when she said that people would do just about anything to not feel pain, including both causing pain and abusing power. She also writes that very few people can handle being held accountable for causing hurt without rationalizing, blaming, or shutting down. I was reminded of the story about the death of John the Baptist when I read about this in particular. John the Baptist held Herod and his wife Herodias accountable for the immorality around their marriage. And in the end, he was unfortunately killed for his efforts. Rather than accepting accountability, they blamed John for pointing out their actions. Brown notes that most people can only name 3 emotions: happy, mad, and sad. And she also describes that when we are unable to articulate our emotions, we feel hopeless or even a destructive level of anger. That's a combination that feels as if it's a recipe for a lot of fractured souls and a lot of discord in our world. We need to be able to do several things in order to name and make sense of our emotions. We need to understand how they show up in our bodies and why. So for instance, do we carry stress in our shoulders, or do we carry fear in our stomachs, or maybe in our throats? We need to get curious about how our families and our community shape our beliefs about the connection between feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. Perhaps you've heard the expression man up. That has some instant connotations for a lot of us. It means probably that you're not showing emotions, or at least not fear or tenderness. And if you're a Southern woman or girl like I was, you might hear the expression, don't act unladylike. And that has a certain set of behaviors that go with it and that are not included in being ladylike. We also need to examine our go-to behaviors. When we're stressed, do we eat, or do we zone out and watch TV, just as an example? And we also finally need to recognize the context. When do we feel certain emotions? In chapter 1, Brene Brown talks about the places we go when things are uncertain or too much. I don't know anyone who hasn't felt one, and usually both of these things at some point during the COVID-19 pandemic that is, as you know, still ongoing, at least at this point. The emotions that we go to in these times include stress, overwhelm, anxiety, worry, avoidance, excitement, dread, fear, and finally, vulnerability. There is a difference between stress and overwhelm. We feel stressed when we evaluate the environmental demand as being beyond our ability to cope successfully. And it includes elements of uncontrollability, unpredictability, and also feeling overloaded. The reality is things are often unpredictable and uncontrollable, but a lot of the times we have the resources, or some of us have the resources, to be able to add an element of that, or at least the illusion of predictability and controllability. But this pandemic has exposed the world for what it is in terms of really, there's very little that we can control. Overwhelm is an extreme level of stress, an emotional or cognitive intensity to the point of feeling unable to function. It's the feeling, as John Kabat-Zinn described, that our lives are unfolding faster than we are able to manage well. Now, her example between the difference of those two, I thought, was really powerful. It comes from her days as being a restaurant server and uses two terms, one being in the weeds and the other being blown. And when you're in the weeds, you can delegate a few things. You can say, take drinks to table 10, or you clear table 12, and that helps you get out of it. But when you're blown, there's nothing to do but to take a 10-minute break and do literally nothing. You can't even say what you need at that point. So if someone's overwhelmed and you say to them, what can I do? And then they break down or just shut down, that's why. It's a function of the nervous system. They're not being stubborn and not telling you how they can't, or not telling you how to help. And you see an example of that in the Bible when Elijah flees from Jezebel. At that point, he is blown. He's in overwhelm. And he's told to do several things in succession. He's given the opportunity to sleep. He's given food. And then he's given 40 days to make a journey. And it's not until after that that he finds himself in the cave, hearing the still small voice of God. Now, notice that progression there. He's given food and sleep, so needs of the body. And then he's given the gift of time and distance away from the event that first caused, or series of events really, that first caused him to go into overwhelm. We need that too, and God would give it to us as much as he would give it to Elijah. Anxiety is an emotion that is characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes like increased blood pressure. Now, you probably know this, or you may know this, but anxiety can be either a state or a trait. Some of us are just wired to idle faster or more slowly than others. But all of us feel anxiety at some point or another. It is thought that at least a third of adults will be affected by an anxiety disorder at some point in their lifetime. And I'm not sure that those statistics are updated to account for the COVID-19 pandemic, which has increased the level of anxiety I think that all of us have felt. Another coping strategy for anxiety, or one of the coping strategies for anxiety, is avoidance, which is maybe self-explanatory, but it's not showing up or zigzagging around and away from the thing that's already feels like it's consuming us. Avoidance will make you less vulnerable in the short run, but will never make you less afraid. The example that I used, or an example that I used with our youth about this, came from the movie, or comes from the movie Frozen. If you don't know this movie, well, if you have kids or grandkids, you probably know this movie. If not, it's a cute film on Disney Plus. Go check it out. But the main character has powers that scare her, powers to freeze things, hence the title. And she basically hides in her room to conceal those powers. But what happens then is that she's consumed by her fear of the power. She never learns to control it, and it makes her more and more afraid. Well, I like this example because, among other things, it means that I can get, do you want to build a snowman, stuck inside people's heads. So sorry, not sorry if I just did that to you. In chapter 2, Brene Brown describes the places we go when we compare. Places like admiration, reverence, envy, jealousy, and then Schadenfreude and Freudenfreude. Now, envy and jealousy, you probably use interchangeably, or at least I do, and a lot of people do. But envy, which is one of the 7 deadly sins in our tradition, entails wanting something that someone else has. Jealousy relates specifically to the dynamics in a relationship. So I may be envious of someone's ability to dance well because I can't, but I would be jealous if a friend of mine isn't spending as much time as they used to with me because they've taken a new job and are too busy. And just two examples of the difference between those. And then those 2 great German words is what I want to end with, and Schadenfreude and Freudenfreude. In the book, she says that Schadenfreude made a comeback in the English use, well, it's a German word, but that it came into frequent use in our culture thanks to an episode of The Simpsons, which is worth checking out. It's in season 2, and it happens around Ned Flanders' opening of a store exclusively for left-handed people. But I digress a little bit. Schadenfreude means taking pleasure at somebody else's suffering. And she uses an example that might feel familiar to a lot of folks. She says that she felt Schadenfreude towards people who were staunch anti-vaxxers and anti-maskers and ended up getting seriously ill from COVID-19. And she did not feel proud of that feeling. And I relate to that a little bit as well. And the thing is, it didn't line up with her values and doesn't line up with mine either. And being able to check your values against those feelings is something that can help you distance yourself from it. That's a key about comparison. Again, we're talking about what happens or where places we go when we compare, is that it isn't actually a choice. There's some instinctual elements to it, some biological elements to it. You know, in the early days of our species, we needed to judge and compare between an animal that wanted to eat us and an animal that didn't want to eat us, just for perhaps obvious example. And while we cannot necessarily choose that comparison happens to us, we do have a choice about how to respond to it once we do notice it, and to stay aware and to be able to assess our feelings and whether those feelings line up with our values and any behaviors that come from us. And finally, I want to talk about Freudenfreude just briefly, because it's such a lovely antidote to Schadenfreude. Freudenfreude is taking joy in someone else's joy. And she's talking to her children in using this example that true friends are those who are not afraid of your light. Meaning that your real friends, if something good happens to you, are going to rejoice with you and not try to tear you down to make them feel better. And so again, true friends are not afraid of your light. And I want to end there. I could go on for a lot longer, but I wanted to keep this video and these videos in the series accessible in length. So I hope you're reading along with us if you have the chance. If not, I hope you're getting something out of these videos. God bless you, and we'll see you next week.